to take a risk as well. There was no guarantee in those early years that the initiative would be successful, that would be sustained, that would grow. In many cases, that's still the case. But actually, it's not taking a risk and failing that God frowns upon. It's simply not taking a risk for the sake of the gospel and His glory in the first place that is the thing that isn't good.
Welcome to Independence, the FIEC podcast. My name's Phil Topham. I'm Executive Director of the FIEC, and with me today is Mark Selby. Hello, Mark.
Hi.
Mark, just tell us, first of all, a little bit about where you're ministering. Just tell us about you.
Yep, great. Okay, so I'm ministering in a place called Hilton, which is just to the south of Derby. It's a large village separated from Derby, but only a sort of 10-minute drive into Derby itself. Used to be, I think, quite a quaint, pretty old village. It's now a large, sprawling, modern housing estate. That's where we are. We moved there about 8.5 years ago.
Name of the church, Mark?
So the name of the church is Grace Church Hilton.
Fantastic. And you're reaching this kind of new housing estate in this part of Hilton.
Yeah, that's right.
Fantastic. Yeah. We're going to think in this episode a bit about what it means to support ministries like that in kind of smaller communities.
Yeah.
And I think it's just really fascinating to think about the model that you followed to plant this church. And we'll get into all that as we talk together. First of all, just tell us a bit about Derbyshire more widely. What's it like as a place to live and minister in?
Great. Okay. I'm a big fan of Derbyshire, really. I grew up in Derby, went away for university and training and things like that as well. But I like Derbyshire. It's got the Peak District just on the doorstep. There's lots of nice countryside to explore. You get Derby itself. You've got big industries there. You've got the railways. You've got Rolls-Royce. You've got JCB, which isn't in Derby, but it's not far from where we are. So there's quite a few larger companies that employ people around us in our part of Derby itself. Yeah.
And what sort of size is Hilton? And where are those people who have moved there to this new housing estate? Yeah. Where are they working in that kind of context?
So Hilton itself is a population of around about 9,000 people. There's more houses being built at the moment. There's a large Ministry of Defence base that was there. The land's all been bought and is now been built on. And most people would travel to Derby, to Rolls-Royce, to the railways, or over towards Uttoxeter to JCB. The majority of people in our village are families, working professionals. Hilton has the largest primary school in Derbyshire, which kind of gives you an impression of the demographics, really. Lots of families with children and trained people. It's quite an affluent area in that sense. Nice houses, quite a lot of nice cars that drive past our house. Gives you an idea of where we live. So
a population of 9,000, but distinct, you say, from Derby itself. So this is a community that sees itself as separate from kind of the main town of Derby.
Yeah, that's right. Which is, I think, quite an advantage to us as a church because we've got a geographically defined area that we're focused on, that we're trying to get to know people in, and people who live in Hilton will recognise that, they live in Hilton rather than just a suburb of Derby. So, geographically defined, countryside surrounding us, but only a 10-minute drive into Derby itself.
What I think is fascinating, Mark, you've done some research. So the Office of National Statistics would say that in Britain there are 220 places, geographically defined places like Hilton, with a population of between 5,000 and 10,000.
Yeah, that's right.
That is a fascinating statistic because that means there are 220 places which perhaps you might think don't quite have the populace to have a self-supporting church, given the statistics of numbers of Christians. So what do we do about that?
Yeah, that's right. Well, if that's the number of places and then there's thousands of people living in those places, that's a huge number of people that need to hear the gospel, need to have a clear, compelling gospel witnessing church in their area to serve them and to proclaim the gospel to them. So, one of the things I I'm concerned about and passionate about is some of these smaller places across the UK. We need gospel witnessing churches to be in them if there isn't a church there at the moment doing that work. And we shouldn't forget about some of these smaller population areas and seek to get Christians on the ground, churches established in these smaller areas.
So tell me your story. How did you come to be planting in Hilton, which is one of these geographically defined smaller areas?
Yeah, okay, great. So previously I was working in an Anglican church as a youth worker and then assistant minister. And towards the end of that time, I did some more theological training, trained with Porterbrook Seminary, which is now Crosslands Seminary. And that's really when I first got to hear about and think about the concept of church planting. I hadn't really come across that before, but actually through the course of those 3 years, heard more about it and just recognised the worth of church planting in terms of reaching some of these unreached areas, starting churches where there hasn't been a clear witness before. And just how when you do that, the model normally is people living there as well, being immersed in that community where you're starting a church. So, I became increasingly convinced of the effectiveness of church planting in making the gospel known and the need for planting with so many places up and down the UK without these churches that would be proclaiming the gospel. There's just such a huge need for more plants to happen, more revitalisation work to happen as well. So I wanted to be a part of that. And I wanted to be a part of that, even if there weren't perhaps the normal things or the traditional things in place that normally allow plants to happen.
So what do you mean by that? So you're talking about the traditional planting model, which is, a group of people go into an area and begin a work, or a pioneer planter goes in and perhaps he's funded.
Sure.
What model did you follow if it wasn't one of those traditional models?
Okay. So I guess when I think about traditional planting, I'm thinking about one sending church, sending several people, maybe 20, 30 people, with a paid minister to do that, and maybe money to buy a building or at least rent somewhere for meetings. I'm convinced that if we want to reach more of these places, then we need to be a bit more flexible, a bit more creative, possibly a bit more risk-taking in order to get bodies on the ground in some of these gospel-needy places. So one big advantage for myself was I was a part of a Derby preaching group made up of like-minded evangelical churches in Derby. And so I was able to say to them, along with Chris, who's my fellow elder, we're thinking about church planting. We've seen this area, Hilton, it's a huge population without a clear, compelling gospel witnessing church. Are we the right people to go there? We're going to largely finance ourselves as individuals, as families, make sure we've got enough income that we need. But we want other churches to stand behind us so that we're not just some crazy unknown cult or organisation that no one knows anything about. Are we the right people to do this? Is this the right area to be thinking of? Would you kind of back us and endorse what we're doing? Kind of give your stamp of approval to what we're seeking to do there in Hilton.
So were you already living in Hilton, or did you then move into Hilton when you'd identified it as a place to plant?
I was living in Burton at the time. We moved into Hilton after a year of trying to sell our house, which was a hard time. We'd made all these plans. We were excited about moving to Hilton and starting to meet people and making the gospel known, but just took a long time to sell our house. God was in that. Through that time, we were able to be refreshed and encouraged at one of the churches in Derby that we were part of for that year, prepare to formally launch as a plant. Yeah.
So you didn't have a traditional sending church. You had a group of churches that helped you and backed you, and as you said, stood behind you.
Yeah, that's right.
So how did you fund it? How are you funded?
Yeah, good question. So For us as a family, we're largely dependent on my wife's salary. Anna works 4 days a week, and then I get a small amount in each month through Stewardship, which is an organisation that collects donations for Christian work, missionary work, and then sends that on to the recipient. So that helps us too. But largely, yeah, we're self-financing as a family. That's the case for my fellow elder as well. And then the Derby churches that stood behind us, they have supported us and helped us financially too, with significant amounts of money, but much lower than you'd normally expect. So our budget as a year, as a church for the year, is around £5,000.
Wow.
And the money that those churches in Derby sent has largely gone on rent for the rooms we use in the village hall, and other overheads like insurances and some resources that we need. But we've got a low budget as a church. We're very grateful for that support from Derby churches, but as individuals, we're largely self-financing.
So people listening to this might be thinking, well, it's all very well for you. Your wife works, evidently brings in a decent salary that enables you and releases you to do the work. What if you're not in that position? What would happen if Anna wasn't working for you, for example? Sure. Would you just knock it on the head and say, oh, well, this isn't for us? Yeah,
sure. Yeah, good question. So Anna's work and the salary that she has been great. That's meant that I can give my time through the week, when Anna's not working, at least to the church work. Our children are at school, so I get between school hours to work on church work. But if that wasn't the case, if Anna's salary wasn't sufficient or Anna wasn't working, then I'd look to do something else so that I could support our family, have the money that we need as a family, and still be able to give time to the church. So I'd look for a part-time job or some kind of work to bring money in as a family so that I could continue to give my time to the church as well. So
you'd look at a kind of bivocational model. What might that kind of look like for folk who are thinking about this sort of church planting?
Yeah, sure. So, for example, Chris, my fellow elder, he was working at the University of Derby in the library there. That was his part-time employment so that his family had enough money, and then the rest of the time he was able to give that to the church. I trained in computer science a long time ago. Unfortunately, my computer skills haven't stayed current. So, I would look for any work that I could really. Probably wouldn't be in computing because I don't think I'm trained sufficiently in that now. But whatever work I could find to keep us going as a family, to bring that income in, which would also allow me to have the time to lead the church as well. So
how many, if I can put it in crass terms, I'm sorry about this, how many hours a week do you give to the plant and then to kind of other responsibilities?
Yeah, sure. So I give between school hours, Tuesday to Friday. Monday is Anna's day off, so I have more time on Monday to give to church stuff. And then, we're busy most of Sundays with various things that we do as a church. Meeting or eating together or meeting people in the community. The largest part of my time is given to church work. Yeah.
And how old is the plant now, and how has this model worked through from kind of beginnings to where you are today, Mark?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So we're 8.5 years old, and we began very small. There were 4 adults, myself and Chris and Anna, my wife, and then a friend who joined us as well, and our daughter. So 4 adults, 1 child. And we've just slowly and gradually grown from there. We're still relatively small as a church, but over the years, people have heard about us, people who've been living in the village perhaps and not settled in a church or had a church background, but not made that a priority in recent years. So, people who lived in the village have come to be with us. Some people have moved into the village and joined us as well. We're very glad for the way that God has graciously added to our number. We've got to know more and more people in Hilton. We've got good relationships with various people. Lots of people, particularly over the last year, 18 months, that we've come across who are in need, who've been needing help. So we've drawn alongside them and are trying to serve them and help them in that, and win opportunities for the gospel through that. We're growing gradually. We're investing in building relationships. We're now working in the school, doing assemblies and things like that. So various opportunities have come about, but we're also committed to being there for the long haul as well. I'm sure in a place like Hilton and lots of other places similar around the UK, in a post-Christendom culture, there's not a ready group of people who are just desperate to come to a church and hear the gospel. I think we've got to take a slightly different approach now, where we pursue that long-term work of drawing alongside people, building meaningful relationships with people, and using those to bring the gospel to them.
So you mentioned the school. What kind of other things are you doing to do that kind of natural work of sharing Christ just through the lives you're living amongst the people in Hilton?
Yep. For us as a family with younger children, the school run is a great opportunity to just get to know people. We've actively tried to join different groups in the village that already happen to draw alongside people. Cubs and Brownies, football group, bowling club that I go to at the weekends, a dog walking group, pub quizzes. Just rather than trying to start things ourselves, which would have been hard as a small church anyway with limited resources, get involved in things that are already going on to meet people in the village. Yeah.
And you mentioned before that you're there for the long haul. Are you looking for the church to become a self-sufficient church that is able to pay you and Chris salaries as pastor and assistant pastor? What's the trajectory?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, great. So we're not against that if that would happen, but at the same time, that isn't our expectation. Just because in a place like Hilton, growth is going to be slow. It's going to be a long-term thing. If the church were to pay to support a full-time minister, realistically, that's going to take years and years to reach the level of finances needed for that to happen. So it's not my expectation that I'm going to get a full-time minister's salary anytime in the near future,
or maybe ever,
or maybe ever. Yeah, that's right. And we're quite happy to continue with being self-sufficient, really, in that sense, because the need for the gospel work in that village is far greater than a need to have a full-time minister's salary.
So you began 8.5 years ago, and there was 4 of you and a child.
Yep.
What are your numbers like now? I know we don't just want to talk in numbers, but I think it would be encouraging for people to hear where it's got to, but also a realism about how long it's taken to get there.
Yeah, that's right. So we're around 20, 25 people at the moment. We've had some people join us, some people leave in the last few years. I think that's probably always going to be the pattern, really. And as a small church, you feel that. There's great encouragement and excitement when more people join us. There's sadness when people leave. The highs are high and the lows are low, I think, as a small church. So it's not always easy, but necessary, I think, to be able to start like this and continue like this.
I was going to ask you about challenges and rewards, but you mentioned highs and lows, so let's go with that. What have some of the highs been, and what have some of the lows, the struggles been for you?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, great. Let's think of the highs, I guess. I think the highs are looking back, recognising God's grace to us, the way He's sustained us and provided for us over the years in so many different ways, whether that's support from churches in Derby, the encouragement from being a part of FIEC, and the joy that's been. I think some of the highs are just recognising some of these meaningful relationships that we do now have with people.
Great.
In Hilton, the number of times we've been able to either share individually the gospel with people, or do that through some of the public events that we've held. So we do see the benefits of that long-term investment in people. So that's been great. I think that the lows are that as a small church, you do feel quite fragile. That was probably more the case in the early years.
Yeah.
If there were tensions in the church, or if there were arguments or fallings out, and couples or families left, that had the potential to really radically reduce our numbers. And although that isn't quite the same today, there's still that vulnerability, still that fragility, I think, as a small church. I think one of the things I was going to mention was the benefit of plural eldership. I'm convinced of that biblically. But if I were to do this work as a lone elder and carry this burden myself and the weight of it with, the vulnerability of it, that would just be an unbearable burden, really. It wouldn't be good for me. It wouldn't be good for us as a family to be in it on our own. So
you would say from the beginning, it's really important to have a plural eldership?
Definitely. Yeah, that's right. I would argue that it's important because that's what the Bible says anyway, but particularly in a situation like this where it's small and it's hard. So all church work will be hard, but there's particular pressures that come when it's a small church like this. And to have Chris there as a fellow elder alongside us, that's just invaluable, really. Yeah.
This podcast is aimed at church leaders. There'll be church leaders listening to this. What do churches need to be thinking about if they're looking at the areas around them and they know there are these areas of small populace, between 5 and 10,000 people, little or no gospel witness? Yeah. What do they need to be thinking about? So in your situation, why won't people just travel into Derby for church? Why not plant a church in Derby? Why plant one in Hilton? Sure. What do church leaders need to be thinking about as they think through where churches might be established and planted?
Yeah, great. Yeah, good question. I think there's a number of things really to say on that. Firstly, people need to know that you care about them. They don't care what you know until they know that you genuinely do care for them. And we're naturally going to do that most with the people that we live amongst. So having a heart for the people in Hilton is much greater, much easier, more obvious for me than to have a heart for the people that live in Littleover or Mickletover suburbs in Derby, where I don't live and where I don't rub shoulders with those people. So there's something really key about living amongst the people you're trying to reach, living amongst the lost that you have a heart for. So that's why we primarily, the majority of us live in Hilton, who are part of the church. I think as church leaders, recognising some of these unreached areas around you, I think one of the key things I'd want to say is be willing to be creative in thinking about what you could do, how you could get plants to start in some of these places. There's nothing wrong with the traditional approach to planting, and we still need that. Yeah. But don't be tied to that. The gospel need is far greater than what a traditional approach to planting can ever tackle. So we need to be more creative. We need to be able to work for easily repeatable planting initiatives. I think oftentimes that will mean, thinking more about finances and being willing for people to be more self-sufficient or bivocational to supply more finances that families need themselves. And be prepared to start small as well. Easily repeatable, creative, flexible in terms of how things are financed, and be willing to take a risk as well. There was no guarantee in those early years that the initiative would be successful, that would be sustained, that would grow. In many cases, that's still the case. But actually, it's not taking a risk and failing that God frowns upon. It's simply not taking a risk for the sake of the gospel and His glory in the first place that is the thing that isn't good. I mean,
you've got Luke 19 open in front of you there. That's right. It's obviously really spoken to you in this.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so the parable of the master who went away to become king, and before he left, he gave each of his servants a mina, value to invest. And when he comes back, he commends the first 2 servants. They've invested the money. The first one's made 10 more, the second one 5 more. The one that he condemns is the one who didn't do anything. He was too afraid to take a risk, basically, and do something with that money. So actually, it's not taking a risk, and even if it failed, that's the hard thing. It's when we simply don't do anything, when we're not even prepared to take a risk in the service of God.
So how would you challenge reluctance? Because I'm sitting here thinking, wow, I'm not sure I'd want to take that risk.
Sure, yeah.
There might be others thinking that. How would you challenge me, Mark? How would you challenge others who are thinking like me?
Yeah. Well, something we've been thinking about as a family over the last few days really is Jesus' call to take up our cross and follow him, to lose our life now for the sake of saving it. We've had a week where that's, seemed to be the case really. But that's the life that Jesus calls us to. As we follow Jesus, who gave up his life for us. There's lots of challenges and sacrifice involved. There's and that's not just for me, that's for Anna as well. She's busy with her full-time job. She's trying to serve women. At the moment, there seems to be several women who've made contact with us who are eager to hear the gospel. And we want to do that. But there's various pressures on time and investment in people. But the Christian life isn't a comfortable life. We're not called to comfortable Christianity. I think sometimes we can expect that in the way that our churches are. If mission is all about perhaps bringing a friend to an event rather than actually doing hard things, to actually do something creative and take initiatives to reach some of these unreached places. I guess the challenge for us all is to keep following Jesus, to take up our cross, to lose our lives, to be wholly invested in something that may well be hard, but is for the sake of Jesus and his glory and the salvation of the lost.
Unlike any ministry, this is a family commitment.
Yeah, that's right. So it affects us all. It affects my wife in terms of it's often harder being part of a small church, not having that body of women around her who will naturally encourage and support. Hard for our children, with there only being a handful of children, and not multiple examples of older children that they can look to as godly examples. But at the same time, it's also a great blessing knowing a family that truly is family, that we're in it together, and we love each other and care for each other. So hard things, but great blessings as well.
Mark, thanks so much for sharing your story about Grace Church Hilton. It's just been fascinating to hear. And if the Lord is prodding you to think about whether you might want to be involved in this kind of pioneering work in some of these smaller parts of the country, but with these distinct communities like Hilton, I'm sure Mark would be delighted to chat to you about it. So Mark, thanks for joining me, and thank you for listening. You can subscribe via all the usual channels to Independence, the FIEC podcast, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.